Hello again, friends. It's time for yet another in other news. A little reference story in most U.S. press from earlier this week I think is actually quite critically important to the future of U.S., not just at the United Nations, but U.S. power in the world. What I'm referring to is on October 31st, Happy Halloween, which was Monday, the United Nations sub-agency named UNESCO voted to allow Palestine to become a member of their little group. Way! Whoa! Wow, what a huge deal that is for everybody, isn't it? Woo! One would think not. But, again, I think it's an indicator of things to come, and it's quite important. First off, what the hell is UNESCO, and why would anybody care about it? Because most people in the U.S. don't, as usual. The UN is this just gigantic bureaucracy, of course, and there's all kinds of sub-agencies and subgroups. And UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And it's actually kind of a cool little group because it has a very specific mission. I call it kind of like the international parks system. What they're mostly known for is these things called World Heritage Sites. And so pretty much every single country on planet Earth is a member of this group, including the U.S., and they give money and then go out and try to preserve, protect certain areas that are awesome world cultural things that we think should be preserved. Like, I don't know, the pyramids at Giza or the Hoover Dam. Hell, I don't know all the stuff they have, but it's, again, very much like the National Park Service that the U.S. has. We're like, oh, Yosemite or Yellowstone, these are beautiful, awesome areas, and we should keep them and protect them for future generations. That's what UNESCO mostly does for the world. And because that's a pretty cool mission, virtually everybody on planet Earth supports them. Again, including the United States. So what's this story about that I'm suggesting is more important than it may appear? Well, you already know that Palestine is not a sovereign state, and the Palestinian bid to become a sovereign state at the United Nations just got put forward a couple months ago. The United States has already sworn on Uncle Sam's grave. Well, actually, I guess Uncle Sam's not dead. On Uncle Sam's bare chest, we have sworn the U.S. will veto that United Nations resolution to officially, at the entire United Nations, allow Palestine to come in. We already know that's going to happen. By the way, that vote is going to be, I think it's tentatively slated still for November 11th, so that's coming up. And the U.S. will veto it when it does, okay? But this is a subgroup of the UN, and it doesn't have to play by the same rules. In fact, no one has veto power at the UNESCO board. And again, there's a whole bunch of other sub-agencies of the United Nations, like the World Health Organization or UNICEF. Maybe you remember that one, or just from Halloween, you know, you go out and collect money for UNICEF. It's for to feed starving kids in other places on the planet. I always stole the money. I'm not a good kid. Was it? Still ain't. Anyway, they don't, at that level, this kind of sub-agency level, there is no United Nations Permanent Security Council. They don't have to have things go through the whole General Assembly or have a resolution to do stuff at these sub-agency levels. So no one has a veto, and so no one could stop Palestine from saying, hey, can we get in this club? And the club voted on it, and they voted yes. I don't know the exact figures. It's something like 130 countries out of 195 that are in this entity voted yes. I think like 40 or 50 of them abstained, which means either they didn't show up or they probably supported the Palestinian cause but didn't want to piss off the U.S. So they just abstained, and then a handful said no. The handful, of course, were led by the United States, who raged about this and said, no, 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 no. Don't let Palestine into UNESCO. Come on, UNESCO. Everybody vote against this. Don't do it, because we don't want Palestine to be recognized as a sovereign state, period. Not at the United Nations level, and certainly not at a sub-agency level. Now, first off, or let me finish that thought. Who also said no? The United States said obviously no. Israel obviously said no. For reasons which elude me, the Canadians also said no. Here's why it's important that those three entities, actually mostly just the U.S., said no. This set into motion a chain reaction wherein the UNESCO group has now lost a quarter of its budget. What? What? The United States has a law on its books which says pretty much if any international organization recognizes and accepts Palestine as a sovereign entity in their club, we refuse to fund in any way, shape, or form that entity. And it's not just the United Nations and not just UNESCO. This is kind of a blanket thing. If any organization in the world accepts Palestine as a sovereign state, we will immediately cut off any funding we have to them. And it's a law. It's a law in the U.S. books. So on Monday when this vote occurred, and 130 countries said yes, and they said officially you're in, that second the United States says, oh, okay, bye. We will not fund this organization anymore. And unfortunately for UNESCO, the United States put about 22% of its annual budget was from the United States. So they, and counting Israel and Canada, who have also said we're going to cut funding, it's about an even 25%. So in one fell swoop, by allowing Palestine in, the UNESCO group has lost 1/4 of its budget. Okay, now on to the next issue. Why would Palestine do this? Dude, that's no surprise. They've already put forward the resolution at the United Nations to get accepted as a sovereign state, and they want to build their credibility and build their acceptance in every way, shape, and form they can in the world now. They're dedicated to kind of just saying, we've given up on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It will never happen. So therefore, we're just going to go through other avenues for legitimacy to try to become a sovereign state. And every little club they can get into, including UNESCO or UNICEF or hell, anything else, every little bit makes them more legit. That's like a Dr. Seuss book. So, yeah, it's no surprise why the Palestinians are doing it. And it's working. Now, here's the bigger issue. For me, that I'm asking you to put your opinions and share your insight here in the forum below this podcast. I actually think it's a much bigger deal. It's just UNESCO. Whatever. The United States could walk away from this and who cares? But here's what I'm asking you about. Is this a good thing? Is this a good thing? And the second question is, what are you going to predict is going to happen in the future? Now, let me back it up and fill in some of the blanks of the question of what I'm asking here. Here's what I'm worried about and think that it's going to have future big repercussions. The United States, again, has this law. It's saying we refuse to do business or give any money to anybody who deals with the Palestinian issue. Or I shouldn't say that. Allows Palestine in. Before I go any further, please let me make this clear. The United States is a friend of Palestine. For 60 years, the United States has themselves said, no, there should be a two-state solution. Palestine should be a sovereign state. The U.S. argument is just not like this. It shouldn't be done through the UN. It shouldn't be done by outsiders. It should be done by the Israelis and the Palestinians. They should figure it out, not anybody else. And that's why the U.S. is going to continue to block any international outside influence, period, to legitimize the Palestinians on their own without it being a joint Israeli-Palestinian thing, okay? Back to the question I'm asking you. What's the future of the United States? Because I think that the U.S. is maybe shooting itself in the foot here, and that's what I'm asking you. Is this a good thing or bad thing what the U.S. is doing? The U.S. is rich. The U.S. is powerful. The U.S. does not even have to be a UN member. Who cares? A lot of people in the U.S. don't want to be UN members. Why would they even care about a sub-agency? Who cares? Here's the deal. If you're not at the table, if you're not in the game, then you don't have a voice. You don't. Hey, you know what? It's just UNESCO. That's right. The U.S. now has no voice in any UNESCO decisions. They have strategically just pulled themselves out in protest of this Palestinian move. So again, you could say, well, so what? The United States, for its part, the Obama administration, I think, was pretty unhappy about this. They went to the Congress immediately when all this was going down last week, and they're like, dude, can we tweak this law? Because we really don't want to cut funding to UNESCO. It's one of the cool UN agencies that we all kind of agree on is a good one and actually does good work. But they could not get anything through the Congress. They could not kind of get a special clause that law wouldn't apply to this. I mean, surprise, surprise, this Congress can't even pass that damn dog leash law. So, the Obama administration, I think, was like, oh, man, this is going to look really bad. And I think it kind of does. And here's the bigger insult, by the way. So the U.S. is basically isolating itself now from UNESCO. And this could be a trend for other UN agencies because the Palestinians are certainly going to try to do this in other organizations. And the U.S. has said, we have a law that we're walking away from any organization that does this. And it could be that the U.S. is just simply isolating itself further and further and pulling its own voice and its own influence away from these international bodies. Again, that's my question. Is that a good thing or a bad thing in your opinion? Here's the kind of insult, though, that I want to kind of close on. I think when the U.S. passed that law to basically not recognize, I shouldn't say not recognize Palestine. The law itself was written like in the 90s. And it was, I'm going to call a spade here. It was pushed by a pro-Israeli lobby in the United States Congress. It was specifically targeting the Palestinians. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't. The law itself does not say if Palestine declares independence, then this, or if an international body lets Palestine in, then we're going to cut funding. It's much more broad and nebulous, and it says something to the effect of the United States won't recognize or fund any international body that accepts any non-sovereign state entity. Something bizarre like that. We all know it was targeted towards Palestine. Let me get back to the insult to finish, though. Why would I suggest this is maybe kind of hurting the United States itself and hurting its pride? Because the United States, for all of its power and all of its influence, and providing a quarter of the budget for this little group, nobody cared. And this is something the United States is not used to. This does not happen, at least it didn't in the past, but it might increasingly be happening into the future. And that's what I want you to think about. 195 countries, or 194, went to the table on Monday to talk at UNESCO to vote on this. Everyone in the room knew what was going to happen. Everyone knew. This is not a surprise. Everyone knew the U.S. would vote against it, and everyone knew the U.S. would pull 1/4 of the budget. And the U.S., for all of its power and influence, was pretty much ignored. That is, again, kind of an insult and kind of hurts the pride of the United States, and it might possibly become a future trend. The world at that meeting decided, we don't really care what the U.S. thinks. The U.S. is alone on this issue, and for all of its power and influence and the money and the checks that they write to UNESCO, we don't care. We're going to go forward with this despite U.S. opinion. And the U.S. has said, okay, good, then we're not giving you any money. We're walking away from this entity. And it looks like the world is increasingly saying, so what? That is important enough to consider. That's my question. Is this move at the UNESCO, and which will probably be essentially you're setting up the stage for the UN resolution on Palestine itself at the entire UN? Is the U.S. going to walk away from that? What do you think? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is the U.S. going to lose its position of power and influence on the planet? Is it isolating itself in a very negative way by doing the things it's doing? I'm asking you. Aren't these great questions? It's just a little UNESCO group, but it's actually quite critically important for a future trend of what might be happening on the planet. In closing, here's the thing that I'm going to watch, and I hope you watch too. I'm now very curious as to see who picks up the tab. They just lost 1/4 of their budget, and 130 countries said, we don't care. And another 50 said, we don't care enough to even vote. Who will pick up the tab of that other 25% will be a very telling indicator of who's bold enough and who can afford it to not really care about U.S. opinion into the future, and who may then become the next major, powerful, influential leader at the UNESCO and the UN and other parts of the planet. If you guess China, that's my guess too, but I don't know. I mean, China in its sleep could write a check to cover 22% of the UNESCO budget. That's not even interest on their interest on their interest for, 1 hour of, Chinese bank time. So are the Chinese going to pony up? Will it be a coalition where all the other 130 countries that voted to ignore the U.S. opinion on this, are they all going to collectively pony up the 22%? I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to watch. And I'll be watching it. And I want your opinions on all the questions I just asked. Is the U.S. isolating itself? Is this a really bad thing? Is this a trend in the future that the United States opinion is going to continue to be ignored by parts of the planet? Woo! I don't know. Curious stuff. Hit me up here on the forums and tell me what you think. But for now, party on.